We're here today with the goal of turning Inspire into a school that provides a safe place for students and staff to learn and grow with dignity. There have been multiple reported incidents of mistreatment of students and a significant lack of support to staff. There's evidence that suggests that the administration has made some intermittent effort to react to these reports. We'd like you to know that there's a group of concerned representatives that have started to try to put our heads together in order to effectively remediate current practices. It must be said that there's a certain level of injury that results from bearing witness to, let alone being the direct recipient of, this misconduct. It quickly became evident to the group that the pervasive problems that create a school culture of mistreatment and divisiveness is not a bad apples problem. That conversely, a positive school culture is only possible with a reliable system of leadership, structured and explicit systems of support, and a shared and intentional school vision. A positive school culture is all the more urgent because ours is a most vulnerable population. The rights of the students having access to dignity at school is crucial. This is why there are laws to support the voices of the most vulnerable. Our hope is that you're receptive to collaborating together with us toward the vision of a school paradigm that's based in mutual support, transparency, accountability, and equitable standards and practices for all. We're committed to that end, and we won't be mollified by anything less than collaborative action.
Here I find myself in the unappetizing position of naming and defining a problem that plagues our school, one so severe that it undermines everything that we have ever dreamt of accomplishing. It could be our undoing if we do not take thorough and thoughtful action over a long period of time. Therefore, please bear with me as I attempt to describe it thoroughly. It did not originate in a day, and no quick fix will remedy it, but we must begin to correct course immediately. I must live with the fact that I bore witness and was powerless to change the gross mistreatment of a most vulnerable part of our community. Is there any greater shame? Moving through my days as a para like a zombie, I closed my eyes and tried metaphorically to stay asleep. Try as I might, I never fully succeeded in eradicating my painful awareness. To spend years at Inspire is to feel a leaden taste of despair, an intentional forgetting, followed by the wool being ripped roughly away from your eyes yet again as you witness yet another event that you wish you weren't seeing. There it is again, as bold as brass, too. Dare I speak? What's the use? There are cameras everywhere. We can all hear it in the halls. Everyone in this building knows. We all know what goes on here. Even on days when many good works and kind deeds have happened, it is all pervasive. Like the air that we breathe, the problem is all around us. When we do attempt to name it, we call it our culture, the culture of unkindness. Sometimes it is not hyperbolic to call it the culture of meanness or the culture of cruelty. The truth is that students are berated, yelled at, belittled, and exposed to various forms of verbal and emotional abuse. This happens not once in a while as an aberration, but with astonishing regularity. I know this because I and other concerned stakeholders made the decision to write down what we have seen and are seeing still. We did this with the hope that gathering data would clearly reveal the need for us to immediately begin to work together for change. Once we began to log incidents of emotional maltreatment or emotional abuse, it was astounding and disheartening just how often there was something significant to log. According to Neerchow, emotional abuse by teachers can be defined as a pattern of verbal and nonverbal behaviors that do not include any type of physical contact between a student and teacher, which results in emotional, social, cognitive, and somatic consequences for the student's functioning and adjustment. Some examples of verbal abuse by teachers include use of sarcasm, ridicule, or denigrating statements, yelling, name-calling, insulting, mocking a student's appearance or disabilities, and making negative comments about a child's family. Nonverbal abuse may include neglect, such as ignoring the student, behaviors such as assigning homework to impose discipline, not an Inspire problem, and using punishment for not responding correctly to an exercise or problem. Neerchow was not addressing special education with this definition, but here I would call attention to the use of isolation in the sensory room as punishment, a deeply problematic and illegal practice, which has lessened somewhat, but has not been eradicated. Again, according to Neerchow, schools are meant to serve as safe places for children. Emotional abuse by teachers in this safe place shatters that perception and creates feelings of uncertainty in children's minds. Children feel powerless because there is no way to escape from the abusive situation. In their powerlessness, they feel shame, a total denigration of their self-worth, and rage. Teachers inflict emotional abuse on students through intimidation, threats, isolation, and humiliation. McCackern, Curie, and Aluende define emotional abuse as the constant use of verbally abusive language to harshly criticize or denigrate a child, and or withholding warmth and affection. A key aspect of emotional abuse is its repetitive or sustained nature. Children from impoverished backgrounds tend to be more at risk for this type of abuse. Aluende Ojugo Enekosa mince no words in describing its devastating effects when they call it the systematic tearing down of another human being. I say with no small feeling of guilt regarding my own instances of complicit silence that this should have been dealt with some years ago. Longtime stakeholders might well be asking, how has it come to this? When did it begin? As the employee who now holds the oldest memories of Inspire, I can remember a time when there was no verbal or emotional abuse at all. There was a feeling of unity and an esprit de corps. Paraeducators often had plans to work with autistic young people through lifelong careers as occupational therapists, SLPs, or behaviorists. Administrators expressed regret that employees used Inspire as a stepping stone, but the upside was that employees seemed to feel a calling, to feel truly honored to work with autistic young people. Our trainings were frequent and varied, and there was never a humdrum feeling that as staff that we were simply stagnating. Our classes were lively places, and there were constant group lessons, not only in language arts and math, but in science and even history as well. There was no IXL, no one screen. Students who desired more social interaction were not ignored. They could have the solitude and quiet that they needed to regulate, but we were always available when they wanted to engage with us. Our days were not idyllic and easy. Indeed, there were many major aggressions from dysregulated students. But staff responded with a high degree of patience and grace. After big restraints, there was debriefing, and people were encouraged to take breaks. When upsetting events had occurred, it was acknowledged that we might be upset and deeply affected, and no one was scorned for failing to live up to an imaginary standard of toughness. In the years shortly after our move to our current location, I noticed a distinct change. There did not seem to be much regard from the administrators of that time for the highly nuanced and broad array of supports that paras provided. Paras were hired off the street, for whom the job certainly did not seem to be regarded as a noble profession or a calling, but rather was just a matter of securing a paycheck. At first, we had many and varied trainings detailing how we could assist with communication, with emotional regulation, through implementation of OT techniques. But this training came to be more and more infrequent. Staff, too, felt increasingly burned out and voiceless, and that there was an increasing lack of appreciation for what they tried to accomplish with very little training. And these frustrations were taken out, one way or another, in ways that impacted students. As administrators turned over, and there was a rapid teacher turnover as well, a new culture locked into place. Now it was possible to work at Inspire and to not only grasp very little about autism, but also what little one could speak of in terms of autistic traits, to refer to them with contempt. As high school culture, replete with ignoring, gossiping, talking harshly about others in the same room, and whispering, along with many unkind paraverbals, such as the ubiquitous eye rolls and expressions of distaste, swept through the school and became entrenched, I found myself resorting to behaviors that I thought I had left behind when I graduated high school in order to survive. Just keep your head down, don't make waves, stay silent. However, no display of cooperative or friendly behavior could have spared me from, at the very least, being alienated from my peers. This was for one crucial reason. I kept my attention focused on my student throughout the day. If my student did not need help with academics or adaptive skills, but wanted to draw with me, to walk or to play a game, to talk, or to simply share a companionable silence, I was there for it. Apart from it being best practice and simply my job, I wanted to show them what was for me self-evident, that they were worthwhile, likable human beings, deserving of people's time and attention. There were classrooms at this point where the normal demeanor towards students was an ignoring laden with contempt. Staff gossiped and talked of shopping, having their nails done, medical and sexual matters, anything, as long as it was not educational or anything positive about the students, ever. As for the students, it was as if we were in a Puritan colony and they had been ordered to be seen, but not heard. They sat there tensely, miserably, or they put their heads down on their desks. This might sound unbelievable and almost impossible, but I assure you that others have observed it and spoken of it. Nor am I speaking of the classrooms at their worst, on an off day, but rather what was the constant norm for hour after miserable hour. And if you ran the risk of being shunned for spending time with your student, that was one thing, but it would be all the worse for you if you were what was known in the room as too positive with your student. I remember other paras telling me that they would never be assigned to a particularly chastised student because they liked this student and thought she was an interesting and talented person and showed their regard. If the student was getting her work done with these kinder paras, that was apparently not the point. Only those who were willing to give frequent negative feedback were welcome. If there were both a gentle way to give a critique or a correction and a harsher option, the latter would always carry the day. A student might be mocked if they displayed very mild expressions of anger, such as a foot stamp, or if they went to the bathroom to cry, or even for academic slowness. Do you know who really gets to me? That one, a teacher said, jabbing a finger towards my student. She went on to describe how his slow processing drove her crazy, with scornful examples given. I glanced at my student. He appeared not to be hearing it. I struggled to keep my face under control, wishing the earth would swallow me. I was afraid of this teacher, and there was more. As an autistic adult, I was barely making it in an autism school. What if I couldn't find another job? Would my child and I be homeless? Looking back now on the bullying of this student, often considered to be the sweetest in our school, I wonder if he heard it, and if he interpreted my failure to stand up for him as my agreement. Trauma literature states that victims of abuse frequently feel that they were more harmed by those who witnessed and failed to act than they were by the perpetrators of the abuse. There was no chance of anyone taking my word for anything over this particular staff person. They were powerful, up and coming. They were the new face of Inspire. As our employees changed, so too our student demographic was going through a profound shift. Our typical Inspire students in the early days presented with a classic autism and resultant communication challenges. They often had close, stable, loving families. However, as the previous decade went on, more and more we received students who were impacted by poverty in an unstable home life and who had trauma histories. They sometimes suffered from neglect and abuse that was not only a feature of their far past, but was ongoing in the present. Their resultant difficulties were complex and involved their emotions and behaviors, and all of our previous training was quite inadequate to serve this new population. We were not trained to be trauma-informed educators, nor were there necessary support systems in place. There was no mental health counselor or guidance counselor, not even on a part-time basis. There was no social worker to connect families with the resources that they badly needed. At present, there is not even a school nurse for a vulnerable population, some with compromised immune systems or chronic physical ailments, some of whom cannot verbally tell us how they are feeling. Thus, our lack of training was compounded by a very real, systemic, top-down inability to help. This chronic feeling of helplessness in the face of students' untangleable knot of problems and their quite evident emotional pain left us with feelings of shame, inadequacy, and even smoldering rage. It is human nature that such feelings tend to spill over. Thus, there was a terrible full circle of the feelings of secondhand trauma coming back to vent themselves on the traumatized, re-traumatizing them in the process. One working hypothesis, therefore, as to the question of why did the events that we logged happen, is that employees are struggling with secondhand trauma and compassion fatigue. Walker describes how teachers and paraprofessionals are exposed to the traumas that students bring into the school every day, including poverty, grief, family problems, and substance abuse. The emotional and physical toll, he goes on to say, is often severe and can cause educators to exhibit traits similar to their students: exhaustion, anxiety, depression, and chronic fatigue. He states that while secondary traumatic stress has long been known as a condition affecting professions such as nurses, social workers, first responders, and counselors, increasingly it is acknowledged as a condition affecting teachers as well. Indeed, a 2012 study of 300 school personnel conducted by the University of Montana found that approximately 75% of the sample exceeded cutoffs on all three subscales of STS. Furthermore, 35.3% of the participants reported at least moderate symptoms of depression. A term used interchangeably with STS is compassion fatigue, a rather elegant descriptor of how the burnout associated with secondary trauma can flatten and deaden empathy. According to McMahon, studies which have focused on teachers working with students with trauma histories have suggested links between the lack of trauma awareness and increased levels of compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, and burnout. This lack of trauma-specific training, McMahon goes on to state, indicates a need for schools to better prepare teachers to support traumatized students while safeguarding their own well-being. All of this speaks to an overwhelming need to put into place trauma-informed practices, which are those supports put in place which consider not only the occurrence of adverse experiences in childhood, but how those experiences can impact children's development, well-being, and ability to learn. Trauma-informed practices offer an opportunity to intervene in difficult behaviors in a way that is respectful of a child's emotional well-being, and thus present an alternative to the more punitive and reactive behavior strategies employed by many schools. There is one more obstacle that I see with regard to our educators moving forward and creating a more supportive, inclusive, and kind culture for our students. I can speak to it personally. My silence as I witnessed the verbal maltreatment of students was, and is, extremely painful to come to a moral reckoning and facing. In the act of opening my eyes and fully acknowledging what I have seen, I am challenged by the inability to forgive myself for my own complicit silence. It would be so tempting to sweep this all under the carpet and to wish it all away. There is a powerful term for this: moral injury. In traumatic or unusually stressful circumstances, people may perpetuate, fail to prevent, or witness events that go against deeply held beliefs and expectations. When someone does something that goes against their beliefs, this is often referred to as an act of commission. And when they fail to do something that is in line with their beliefs, this is an act of omission. Individuals may also experience betrayal from leadership, others in position of power, or peers. In order for moral injury to occur, an individual must feel like a transgression has occurred and that they or someone else crossed a line with regard to their moral beliefs. Guilt, shame, disgust, and anger are the hallmarks of moral injury. U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. It overlaps tremendously with PTSD, they say, lacking the hyperarousal features. As the holder of our school's memories of the past, I exhort you with all of the eloquence that I can muster. Please use these tools and take us forward into a future that we can be proud of. Please do the needful. Thank you for your time and attention.
Susie has given you an introduction to explain our purpose. You've seen direct quotations of actual student mistreatment at Inspire. You have heard Violet's account of the deterioration of our school's culture and programs, replete with student abuse, neglect, and ignoring, as well as the browbeating, intimidation, and ostracization of some staff by others. The Vermont AOE has adopted the Model Code of Ethics for Educators from NASTEC, used to ensure educators and educational communities understand how professional decision-making can impact the safety and well-being of children, as well as the culture and mission of the school. We will be referring to these standards as we present critical problems and issue a call to action. Principle 1 of the Code of Ethics outlines the responsibility to acknowledge and be held accountable for ethical problems. We understand that some staff may know very little about positive behavioral interventions and may even believe that punitive actions are beneficial. The Code of Ethics clarifies that lacking knowledge or differences of opinion do not excuse potentially harmful interactions or interventions. We call on you now to acknowledge the scope of Inspire's ethical violations, including long-term impact of maltreatment on students and the effects of targeted mistreatment, also known as bullying. Acknowledge the need to employ positive behavior strategies with unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard is a term coined by Carl Rogers, and it is made up of 4 components: non-judgmental acceptance, empathy, respect, and warmth and genuine caring. Acknowledge the need for extensive training for staff at all levels in positive behavior interventions, and that desire and capacity to implement them be reflected in Inspire's hiring process. We have compiled for you an extensive list of training resources with many examples of workshops, seminars, presenters, and other professional development opportunities that address this topic, among other related topics. As some initial action steps toward the effort of resolving student maltreatment, we ask our administration to enact strong policies and accountability measures against student maltreatment and condemn interventions that constitute maltreatment. Implement protocol to respectfully prompt a fellow staff member who is actively mistreating a student to desist. School leadership should communicate expectations through repeated verbal statements, explicit teaching and modeling, and acknowledge workplace anger and stress. Additionally, we ask leadership to include adult-focused social-emotional learning as a critical component for enabling positive behavior interventions and creating a positive school culture. The Code of Ethics recognizes high standards, which professional educators should be held to and have a responsibility to hold themselves to. Principle 2 addresses the responsibility to professional competence. The professional learning opportunities and training that Inspire has offered in the years of decline have severely lacked in quantity and quality. As a recent example, the 2.5 days dedicated to professional development on the Inspire calendar for March of 2024 were spent at home reading a handout on executive function that did not appropriately apply to our students, and listening to a podcast episode on ABA with a summary paragraph to be written as homework. This was assigned to paras only. No professional development was provided for classroom teachers or administration. We ask that administration invest in high-quality, ongoing professional development and strive for not only competence, but continued improvement. Inspire needs clearly communicated standards for job performance to equip professional educators with the defined performance criteria needed to reflect on practice and self-evaluate across areas. A review of IEP service delivery requirements for each student to identify undelivered or inadequately delivered services and take immediate action to comply with all service delivery requirements. Currently, teachers are not reliably meeting all IEP service delivery requirements for individualized instruction, and Inspire's BCBA is not meeting IEP service delivery requirements for behavioral services or consultation. Other discrepancies exist as well. In addition to the standard of curriculum of math, language arts, science, etc., and in addition to the necessary training mentioned above, a positive and inclusive school would have organized teaching in the areas of physical education and arts and humanities. Our unique cohort of students also requires genuine community alliances for pre-vocational and social-emotional development. We have one resource that's returned as an ally. This is a great start. We do have important material resources to genuinely support self-care, development, and independence. 3 transportation vehicles, a fully operational kitchen, immediate access to nature, trails, and fields, and downtown Brattleboro. With these starting points, we need leadership to support the growth of our existing programs and establish those essential programs that are missing. We call on you to acknowledge the importance of social emotional learning and embed the teachings and practices into all aspects of Inspire. Acknowledge the importance that SEL has on self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, decision-making, and relationship skills, and embed these teachings as well. Provide training to staff in a science-backed curriculum for social and relational skills for students with autism. Vermont AOE has a free virtual platform for learning and teaching SEL, but there are many others with deeper and more applicable nuances included in the packet of resources. Inspire needs to provide students with educational experiences that prioritize art, music, PE, and science. Besides every student's right to an education that includes humanities enrichment, these subjects are critical for integrating holistic knowledge and skills. Art helps employ abstract thinking, sensory integration and regulation, emotional exploration, self-expression, developmental growth, visual spatial skills, and recreation skills for creative, independent play. Music targets speech components like tempo, pitch, dynamics, tonality, and mood, as well as reading components like comprehension, sustained attention, and storyline. And math topics such as counting, rhythm, intervals, patterns, symbols, harmonies, time signatures, overtones, and more. PE, of course, offers movement and exercise, and it also supports motor function, sensory input, teamwork, relationships, and sports skills. Inspire needs improved community and vocational opportunities. Our students spend the vast majority of their time sitting at desks with worksheets or tech devices. The expectation is that they must follow directions or perform drudgery to be considered learning and eligible for a break or a preferred activity. Students need real-world experiences that follow their interests and natural skills. Adaptive skills at Inspire consist of the same routine chores. Ironically, these tasks, trash or recycling disposal, vacuuming, dishes, table wiping, and doorknob cleaning, are very seldom adapted to meet individual needs. While common housekeeping skills are important, they are no substitute for individualized vocational learning or quality support to acquire the skills in acts of daily living.
Consistently respectful and inclusive relationships are the backbone of positive school culture. establishing and maintaining relationships that support respectful, informative, and effective communication between staff, as well as families, caregivers, is paramount to establish a healthy school culture. Given that many staff at Inspire experience systematic marginalization, this pursuit is all the more important. To these ends, we call on the administration to acknowledge and eliminate staff unkindness, maliciousness, and exclusivity at Inspire. We require teams consisting of teachers, one-to-ones, families or caregivers, admin, and student voice when accessible to inform decisions of classroom changes or one-to-one reassignments. As required by Rule 4500, the Vermont laws governing the use of restraint and seclusion in schools, we must begin coordinating post-restraint seclusion debriefing meetings and invite families or caregivers for the purpose of transparency and shared input toward the efforts of reducing the use of physical management. Using the sensory room should never be a punishment, and transport restraints should never be used to remove students from a classroom for disruption or refusal. As a concept, exclusionary discipline is considered detrimental to students' social, emotional, and academic needs, and the Vermont AOE recommends against it. A sensory room is a therapeutic tool and a positive option for supporting self-regulation. We require the administration to issue strong policies and accountability measures to support this. Finally, we call for regular meetings held at least weekly, including all involved staff, to discuss students' needs and concerns. And these should rotate repeatedly through every student. Data sharing and review with collaborative input are essential components in these efforts. The Code of Ethics acknowledges the importance of data-informed decision-making and science-based practices for ensuring fair and equitable treatment and education for our students. The value of data in schools, in a school for students with autism, cannot be overstated. Attention to reinvigorating a system for data collection, analysis, and decision-making would allow us to systematically and objectively assess behavior and track progress. The BIP Tracker software and the Samsung tablets provided to collect data are tools that could achieve this goal if they were used with fidelity, team-oriented support, and formally constructed interventions. Most of our behavior plans that are currently being used have been written by teachers or one-to-ones. While well-intentioned and ostensibly good plans, they lack the clarity and cohesiveness of one written by a BCBA, which would contain well-defined goals, clearly communicated intervention strategies, along with regular oversight, support, and monitored fidelity in their use. Inspire needs a data management program that enables all staff to input and view data trends with ease, along with the training and support in the use of these tools. Along with reliable systems for BCBA, behavior intervention support, and consistent data collection, the administration must establish routine processes for data review and analysis with team input to drive decisions. Principle 4 emphasizes that schools have a responsibility to engage with and contribute to the community, and stresses community involvement being in the best interest of students. Inspire is virtually unknown as a school throughout Brattleboro, including among our campus neighbors. We have no affiliation with the local public schools or youth agencies or summer programs. Many times, whole classes have had no opportunity to go outdoors or on fields or the nature trails for weeks at a time because Inspire doesn't offer recess. Inspire needs to acknowledge the value and responsibility to provide community access, connection, and contribution to students. School leadership must begin providing outside recreation and education opportunities while committing to support engagement, connection, and contribution among the wider community resources and partners. Under responsibility to school community, the Code of Ethics includes adherence to standards of honesty, integrity, and transparency in public communications, and makes specific reference to disclosure of information. We compel administration and board leadership to make forthright revisions to Inspire's website by removing inaccurate or inflated claims about offered programs, resources, and cultural practices, as well as website claims about Inspire's organizational values or beliefs that conflict with the realities we are presenting. Additional resources. Inspire currently proclaims ABA as its method of behavior therapy and offers opportunity for all one-to-ones to become certified as a registered behavior technician. Although there are some one-to-ones who have completed RBT training, Inspire has failed to certify anyone presently employed with the school as an RBT, and it presently employs no RBTs. Previously, everyone was instructed to take the Relias RBT course in the spring of 2021, paid for by Inspire. The current offering is a free online version with a bonus or pay increase to follow. However, in order to fulfill and maintain RBT certification, each RBT candidate or RBT needs 5% of their monthly working hours supervised and documented by a BCBA. This amounts to roughly 7 hours per month supervision for each one-to-one. The Vermont AOE states that while no specific number for a BCBA caseload exists, it varies based on the extent of client needs. The suggested ethical caseload is 6 to 10 clients per 40-hour work week. Inspire students have complex needs requiring specialized care and education. Given our enrollment numbers and the time and work requirements outlined above, Inspire needs a full-time BCBA dedicated only to student and staff support and supervision to accurately represent our school as an ABA provider. Alternatively, there are many other science-backed therapeutic methods for students with autism that we would be eager to explore. Most, if not all, of Inspire's students take daily medication. Most, if not all, of Inspire students experience communication challenges. And many also experience behaviors that could lead to illness or injury, including skin picking, pica, an eating disorder in which a person eats things that are not considered food, aggression, self-harm, toileting challenges, and more. We have students with severe food allergies, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, Smith-Magenis syndrome, diabetes, and students that experience sexual and physical abuse. Students need to be evaluated after a restraint has taken place when they vomit or complain of pain, when they seem not themselves, when they have trouble staying awake. Inspire needs a school nurse, or a medical professional. Given factors of their disability and the well-researched impact on self-concept and self-worth, autistics are at significantly increased risk for development of mental health challenges. While 25% of the general population has some sort of mental health struggle, that number increases to almost 80% for those with autism. At least 2 Inspire students within the past year have verbalized thoughts of suicide. Several others have expressed extreme depression, and virtually all experience very high levels of anxiety. Students have disclosed abuse or displayed signs that abuse may have occurred. Some have reported feeling bullied at school. Beyond the fact that at least one student has counseling as an IEP service, Inspire needs to facilitate access to mental health care to support the emotional development and well-being of all our students. If a full-time school counselor is not employed at Inspire, then affiliate connections with therapists or counselors on or near the Winston Prouty campus should be made. As said before, we have 3 working vehicles, a fully functioning kitchen, access to a big gym, fields and nature trails, and close proximity to the downtown. We need somebody to coordinate trips to art galleries, theater and music venues, farms, recreation areas, visits to fire and police stations, senior centers, post office, hospital, vet, other local sporting events. We need someone to connect to our school with other schools and invite educators and presenters to visit. We need someone to coordinate extracurricular activities for our students and to seek out vocational opportunities specific to individual interests and skills. We need somebody to organize community service activities like greening up the roadside trash or donating food and other items to shelters, or creating art to display, not once a year, not just one classroom, and not just during the summer program. Family engagement is one way many schools support students to make continual growth. We know that many of our families experience food and housing instability, struggle to acquire childcare, have transportation issues, are underemployed, experience stress and mental health issues of their own, and all carry the extra responsibilities of caring for a child with special needs. We need someone to assist our families in accessing social services, food banks, respite providers, support groups, and childcare. We need to have a way for our families to be part of our school community, inviting them to participate in their child's education, soliciting their feedback and input on their child's goals. It takes a village to raise a child, and schools are a vital part of this village.
If you found it difficult to focus and sit through the previous narrative and impact statement that Violet made, please note it was approximately 17 minutes long, far shorter than the amount of time many of our students, children who have significant impulse control problems, difficulty focusing, sensory sensitivities, and many who also have co-occurring mental health and chronic medical problems are expected to sit quietly at their desks, either silently doing their work, which often has no clear meaningfulness, purpose, or interest to them, without complaints. Or alternately, they are actively ignored while staff loudly socialize in the background or scroll on their cell phones. And then they are chastised sarcastically, harshly reprimanded, purposefully misunderstood, parodied, and/or made fun of when they make attempts at connection, communication, and understanding with staff or other students. If you found it challenging to stay focused during the main presentation, and quite possibly struggled with a desire to escape having to listen to overwhelming problems and information that is very difficult to acknowledge and understand, know that that presentation was approximately 40-50 minutes long, a much shorter duration than a recent young student who craves nearly constant social connection and interaction, was isolated in a sensory room, one of several involuntary trips to the sensory room that same day, for having difficulty controlling impulsivity along with consistently high energy levels, things that are well out of his general ability to self-regulate for anything near the entirety of his current 5-hour-plus school day, not to mention the lengthy hour-plus transport time each way from home to school and back again. Many of our students are routinely expected to remain in their classrooms for longer than 40 minutes at a time, doing what they are told to by staff, often with little real choice offered. Our autistic students are often harshly reprimanded or sarcastically talked down to when they express agency via disagreement, confusion, frustration, impatience, or discomfort with their environment, expectations or work being presented to them, or after attempting to self-advocate for their needs. During these times, commands, threats, and even derision are often issued to students by under or untrained, under-resourced, and under-supported staff, who often don't recognize or deny their own signs of dysregulation, including anger and burnout. Staff often evidence little understanding or acceptance of the traits and needs of autistic students, basic understanding and knowledge of general developmental problems, appropriate standards of professional communication and conduct, care and respect for individuals with disabilities, including patience, kindness, and compassion. Students at Inspire, despite some individual staff's attempts to make things better, are generally situated in an educational environment where active or barely suppressed hostility or irritation is tolerated and frequently directed at their very presence and existence as autistic neurodiverse individuals. This hostility includes being the frequent target of jokes, cruel asides within their hearing from staff, and ruthless gossip both in and out of students' presence. This is known in modern terms as elements indicative of a systemically exclusionary ableist culture, and it is traumatic and harmful to students and staff. So please choose to sit with your discomfort. Use it to change. A majority of our students themselves experience moderate to extreme discomfort at our school every day they attend, and most exert an immense and quite admirable degree of effort at self-control and setting aside their own wants and needs, certainly much more than they are generally given credit for, to continue showing up to school for the scraps of attention and often mediocre management they might be given here. They deserve better, and we at Inspire can do much better.